Marcus Thompson sat in the back row of Judge Harrison's courtroom, his worn sneakers barely touching the floor. At 17, he looked even younger than his age, with messy brown hair that hadn't seen a proper cut in months and clothes that had seen better days. The other teenagers in the courtroom were there for various minor offenses, but Marcus was different. He was there by choice, spending his afternoons watching court proceedings instead of hanging out at the mall or playing video games like other kids his age. The courtroom was buzzing with the usual morning chaos. Lawyers shuffled papers, defendants whispered nervously with their attorneys, and family members filled the gallery seats. Judge Patricia Harrison, a stern woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, surveyed the room with the practiced eye of someone who had been on the bench for over 20 years. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, though some said she had little patience for what she considered frivolous cases or unprepared attorneys. Marcus had been coming to this courthouse for 3 months now. It started when he got detention for skipping history class and discovered that watching real legal proceedings was far more interesting than anything his textbooks could offer. While his classmates were struggling with basic civics lessons, Marcus was absorbing complex legal arguments, courtroom procedures, and judicial decision-making processes. He carried a small notebook where he jotted down interesting cases, legal terminology, and procedural observations. Today's docket was particularly full. The first case involved a custody dispute that had been dragging on for months. Marcus watched intently as both attorneys presented their arguments, noting how Judge Harrison cut through the emotional appeals to focus on the legal precedents and the best interests of the child. He scribbled notes about parental fitness standards and the weight given to children's preferences in custody determinations. The second case was a landlord-tenant dispute over security deposits. Marcus found himself predicting the judge's questions before she asked them. When the tenant's lawyer failed to cite the relevant housing code violations, Marcus quietly wrote down the statute numbers in his notebook. He had spent countless hours in the public library, not just reading legal textbooks but studying actual case law and statutory codes. During the lunch break, Marcus remained in the courtroom while most people cleared out. He often used this time to organize his notes and reflect on the morning's proceedings. Court clerk Sarah Martinez had noticed the teenager's regular presence and his obvious interest in the legal proceedings. She approached him during one of these quiet moments. "You're here a lot," Sarah observed, settling into a seat near Marcus. "Most kids your age would rather be anywhere else." Marcus looked up from his notebook, slightly embarrassed to be noticed. "I find it interesting," he said simply. "More interesting than school, anyway." Sarah glanced at his notebook, surprised to see detailed notes about case citations, procedural motions, and legal analysis. "You write down a lot of technical stuff. Do you understand what it all means?" "Most of it," Marcus replied. "The parts I don't understand I look up later at the library." Sarah was impressed but also concerned. "Are you having trouble at home? Sometimes kids hang out here when they don't want to go home." Marcus shook his head. "Nothing like that. My mom works 2 jobs, so I have time after school. I like watching how the law actually works. It's different from what they teach us in civics class." The afternoon session brought a more complex case involving a small business owner accused of tax evasion. The defendant had chosen to represent himself, which immediately put Judge Harrison on edge. Self-represented litigants often slowed down proceedings and rarely understood proper courtroom protocol. The business owner, Mr. Chen, was clearly nervous and struggled to articulate his defense. Judge Harrison's frustration became evident as Mr. Chen fumbled through his paperwork, unable to locate the documents the prosecutor was referencing. "Mr. Chen," the judge said sharply, "do you have the amended returns that were filed with the State Revenue Department?" "I think so, Your Honor," Mr. Chen replied, shuffling through a disorganized stack of papers. "But I'm not sure which ones you mean. The documents specifically referenced in Motion 23B, filed by the prosecution 3 weeks ago," Judge Harrison clarified, her patience wearing thin. Marcus watched the exchange with growing interest. He had observed similar situations before and had studied the procedural requirements for tax cases. In his notebook, he had detailed notes about the burden of proof in tax evasion cases, the distinction between civil and criminal tax violations, and the specific documentation required for various defenses. Mr. Chen continued to struggle, clearly overwhelmed by the legal complexity of his situation. Judge Harrison finally called for a brief recess, during which she advised Mr. Chen to seriously consider hiring an attorney. Mr. Chen, I strongly recommend you obtain legal representation. Tax law is complex and you're facing serious charges. Your Honor, I can't afford an attorney, Mr. Chen replied. I've already spent everything I had on accounting fees trying to straighten this out. Judge Harrison sighed. I understand your financial constraints, Mr. Chen, but you're not doing yourself any favors by proceeding without proper legal guidance. Marcus had been following the case closely and noticed something that both the prosecutor and Mr. Chen seemed to have missed. According to his notes from previous tax cases, there was a specific deadline for the type of amended return the prosecutor was demanding, and based on the timeline presented, that deadline had already passed. More importantly, there was a recent appellate court decision that created an exception for small businesses that had made good faith efforts to comply with reporting requirements. As the recess continued, Marcus wrestled with whether he should say anything. He was just a teenager with no formal legal training, sitting in the gallery of a courtroom. But he had seen similar cases before, and he was confident about the legal precedent he had researched. The injustice of watching someone potentially face serious consequences due to a missed legal technicality bothered him more than his fear of speaking up. When court reconvened, Mr. Chen resumed his fumbling defense. Judge Harrison watched with barely concealed frustration as the man continued to mishandle his case. The prosecutor, sensing an easy victory, pressed forward aggressively, demanding immediate resolution. It was at this moment that Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Standing up in the gallery, his voice slightly shaking but clear, he said, Your Honor, may I approach the bench? The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Harrison's eyes widened in surprise and irritation. Young man, this is not a classroom or a television show. Please take your seat immediately. But Marcus had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. Your Honor, I believe there's a significant legal issue that hasn't been addressed in this case. Judge Harrison's face flushed with anger. Security, please escort this young man from my courtroom immediately. The courtroom erupted in whispers and confused murmurs as the bailiff, Officer Rodriguez, approached Marcus. The teenager stood his ground, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. Judge Harrison's face had turned a deep shade of red, and her voice carried the full weight of her authority when she spoke again. Young man, you have just committed contempt of court, Judge Harrison announced coldly. You cannot simply interrupt legal proceedings because you think you have something to contribute. Marcus felt his palms sweating, but he had come too far to back down now. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a time-sensitive legal precedent that could affect this case. Time-sensitive? Judge Harrison scoffed, gesturing for Officer Rodriguez to wait. What could a child possibly know about time-sensitive legal matters? This isn't a movie where teenagers save the day with dramatic speeches. The prosecutor, District Attorney Williams, looked amused by the interruption. He had been prosecuting tax cases for 15 years and was confident in his position. Your Honor, perhaps we should let the young man speak so we can all have a good laugh before we continue with the serious business of this court. Mr. Chen, the defendant, looked between Marcus and the judge with confusion and a glimmer of desperate hope. He had been drowning in legal complexity all morning, and any interruption felt like a potential lifeline. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing this was his only chance. Your Honor, I've been studying the recent appellate decision in Commonwealth v. Riverside Printing decided just 6 weeks ago. The case established that small businesses who make documented, good faith efforts to comply with amended filing requirements cannot be held liable for late submissions if the Revenue Department failed to provide adequate notice of procedural changes. The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Harrison's expression shifted from anger to surprise, while D.A. Williams's confident smirk began to fade. Mr. Chen's eyes widened with hope he didn't dare acknowledge. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his confidence growing, the prosecution's demand for the amended returns appears to be based on revised procedures that weren't officially published until after Mr. Chen's original filing deadline. Under the Riverside Printing precedent, this creates a reasonable reliance defense. Judge Harrison stared at the teenager for a long moment. The case he was citing was indeed recent, and she hadn't yet had time to fully review its implications for pending tax cases. "Young man, where exactly did you learn about Commonwealth versus Riverside printing?" "I read it at the public library, Your Honor," Marcus replied simply, "along with the related cases it references. I've been following tax law developments because I've noticed they come up frequently in your courtroom." DA Williams quickly pulled out his phone and began searching for the case citation. His confident expression was rapidly disappearing as he realized this teenager might actually know what he was talking about. Judge Harrison turned to Mr. Chen. "Mr. Chen, were you aware of this precedent?" "No, Your Honor," Mr. Chen admitted. "I've been trying to handle this myself, but I don't really understand all the legal requirements." "And you, Mr. Williams," Judge Harrison addressed the prosecutor, "are you familiar with this recent decision?" DA Williams looked uncomfortable as he continued searching his phone. "I'm reviewing it now, Your Honor. It's a very recent decision, and we're still analyzing its impact on pending cases." Marcus pulled out his worn notebook and flipped to a specific page. "Your Honor, if I may, I have the full citation and a summary of the court's reasoning. The decision specifically addresses situations where small business owners rely on outdated procedural guidance from Revenue Department publications." Judge Harrison was now looking at Marcus with a mixture of amazement and suspicion. "Young man, what is your name and what is your interest in this case?" "My name is Marcus Thompson, Your Honor. I'm 17 years old and I don't have any connection to this case. I just come here to watch court proceedings because I find the law interesting." "You find tax law interesting?" Judge Harrison asked incredulously. "All law, Your Honor," Marcus replied. "But tax cases are particularly complex because they involve both civil and criminal elements, and the precedents change frequently." Officer Rodriguez had been standing nearby, unsure whether he should still be escorting the teenager out. Judge Harrison noticed his uncertainty and waved him back to his position. DA Williams finally looked up from his phone, his expression grim. "Your Honor, I need to request a brief recess to review this precedent and its applicability to the current case." "I think that's advisable," Judge Harrison agreed. "But first, Mr. Thompson, I want you to approach the bench." Marcus walked forward on unsteady legs, acutely aware that every eye in the courtroom was on him. When he reached the bench, Judge Harrison leaned forward and spoke in a lower voice. "Mr. Thompson, in my 23 years on this bench, I have never had a teenager interrupt my courtroom to cite legal precedent. I'm not sure whether to hold you in contempt or ask you to clerk for me." "I'm sorry for the interruption, Your Honor," Marcus said quietly, but Mr. Chen seemed like he was about to lose his case over something that might not be his fault. "And you decided it was your responsibility to intervene?" "I couldn't just sit there and watch an injustice happen when I knew there was a legal solution." Judge Harrison studied the young man's face carefully. "Mr. Thompson, are your parents attorneys?" "No, Your Honor, my mom works at a diner and a cleaning service. My dad isn't in the picture." "Then how exactly did you learn to read appellate decisions?" "I started coming here during lunch breaks and after school. When I heard cases that interested me, I would go to the library and research the legal principles involved. The law librarian, Mrs. Patterson, helped me understand how to find cases and read legal citations." Judge Harrison was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Mr. Thompson, you realize that even if you're correct about this precedent, your behavior today was highly inappropriate?" "Yes, Your Honor, I understand that. But I also believe that justice is more important than proper courtroom etiquette." The judge couldn't help but be impressed by the teenager's earnest response, even as she struggled with how to handle this unprecedented situation. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to call a 30-minute recess. During that time, I want you to write down everything you know about this Riverside printing case and any related precedents. Can you do that?" "Yes, Your Honor. And I want you to understand that if you're wrong about this legal precedent or if you've wasted this court's time, there will be serious consequences." Marcus nodded solemnly. "I understand, Your Honor." As Judge Harrison called for recess, the courtroom buzzed with excited conversation. Mr. Chen approached Marcus with tears in his eyes, thanking him repeatedly. Sarah Martinez, the court clerk, shook her head in amazement as she watched the teenager settle into a corner to write his legal analysis. DA Williams gathered his files with obvious frustration, knowing that his seemingly straightforward case had just become much more complicated. As he headed to his office to research the precedent, he muttered to his assistant about know-it-all kids disrupting the legal system. But in the back of the courtroom, Mrs. Patterson, the law librarian, smiled quietly. She had been following Marcus's legal education journey for months and wasn't surprised by his intervention. She had watched him transform from a curious teenager into someone with genuine legal insight, and she knew this was only the beginning of his story. During the recess, Marcus sat in the courthouse hallway with his notebook spread across his lap, carefully writing out his legal analysis. His handwriting was neat and precise, a habit he had developed from months of taking detailed court notes. Around him, attorneys and court staff whispered about the unusual scene they had just witnessed. Mrs. Patterson arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes into the recess, carrying a worn leather briefcase filled with legal texts. She had received an urgent call from Sarah Martinez explaining the situation. As the head law librarian for the county library system, Mrs. Patterson had been Marcus's informal mentor for months, guiding his self-directed legal education. "Marcus," she said, settling beside him on the wooden bench. "Sarah told me what happened. Are you certain about the Riverside printing precedent?" Marcus looked up from his writing, relief evident in his eyes at seeing a familiar face. "Mrs. Patterson, I've read it 3 times and cross-referenced it with the underlying tax statutes. The timing elements match Mr. Chen's situation exactly." Mrs. Patterson opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick legal volume. "Show me," she said simply. For the next 10 minutes, Marcus walked through his analysis with the precision of a seasoned attorney. He cited not only the primary case but also the underlying precedents it relied upon, the specific statutory language it interpreted, and the procedural requirements it established. Mrs. Patterson followed along, occasionally asking clarifying questions that Marcus answered confidently. "Marcus," she said finally, "your analysis is correct. But you realize what you've done here goes far beyond legal research?" "What do you mean?" "You've essentially provided pro bono legal counsel to a defendant in a criminal proceeding. That's typically something only licensed attorneys can do." Marcus felt a chill of worry. "Am I in trouble for that?" "I don't think so," Mrs. Patterson replied. "You didn't formally represent Mr. Chen or provide direct legal advice. You simply brought relevant precedent to the court's attention. But Marcus, this kind of intervention is extremely unusual. Judges don't typically appreciate teenagers correcting their courtrooms." Back in Judge Harrison's chambers, the judge was conducting her own research into the Riverside printing case. She had called her law clerk, Jennifer Kim, to help verify the precedent and its applicability. What they found confirmed Marcus's analysis but also raised troubling questions about D.A. Williams' preparation. "Jennifer," Judge Harrison said, "how did a 17-year-old catch a legal precedent that an experienced prosecutor missed?" "It's a very recent decision, Your Honor," Jennifer replied. "Only 6 weeks old. It's possible it simply hadn't filtered through the DA's office yet. But it's directly on point for tax cases like this one. Shouldn't Williams be monitoring recent appellate decisions in his area of practice?" Jennifer nodded uncomfortably. "He should be, Your Honor." Meanwhile, in the DA's office 3 blocks away, Williams was having a heated discussion with his supervisor, Chief Deputy DA Margaret Foster. The Riverside printing case was indeed recent, but it had been covered in the State Bar's monthly legal update, which Williams admitted he hadn't read thoroughly. "Bill," Foster said sternly, "how does it look when a teenager knows tax law precedents better than our senior prosecutor?" "The kid got lucky," Williams replied defensively. "He probably just happened to stumble across one case that seemed relevant. From what I'm hearing, his analysis is quite sophisticated." "This isn't stumbling across anything." Foster had been following the case through courthouse gossip and was concerned about the embarrassment to her office. "Bill, if this precedent applies, we need to dismiss the charges against Mr. Chen, and we need to review all our pending tax cases to see how many others might be affected." When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Word had spread through the courthouse about the teenager who had challenged the judge and prosecutor with legal precedent. Several attorneys had slipped into the gallery to witness the outcome. Judge Harrison took her seat and surveyed the packed courtroom. Marcus sat in the front row now, his legal analysis complete and his notebook closed. Mr. Chen looked hopeful but nervous, while D.A. Williams appeared grim and frustrated. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Harrison began, "please approach the bench and present your analysis." Marcus walked forward, carrying the pages he had written during recess. His legs felt unsteady, but his voice was clear as he began to speak. Your Honor, Commonwealth versus Riverside Printing was decided by the State Appellate Court on August 15th of this year. The court held that small businesses cannot be held liable for procedural tax violations when they relied in good faith on outdated guidance from state revenue departments. Marcus continued with his analysis. Citing specific page numbers and legal reasoning from the decision, he explained how the timing of the Revenue Department's procedural changes matched the timeline in Mr. Chen's case, and how the appellate court's reasoning directly applied to the current situation. Judge Harrison followed along with her own copy of the case, occasionally nodding as Marcus made his points. Tay Williams sat silently, realizing that his case was falling apart. Mr. Thompson, Judge Harrison said when Marcus finished, your analysis is thorough and accurate. However, I need to address the highly irregular nature of your intervention in these proceedings. The courtroom held its breath. In my 23 years on this bench, I have never had a non-attorney interrupt a proceeding to cite legal precedent. Such behavior is typically grounds for contempt of court and immediate removal from the courtroom. Marcus stood straighter, prepared to accept whatever consequences followed. However, Judge Harrison continued, I have also never encountered such a sophisticated understanding of legal precedent from someone without formal legal training. Your intervention, while procedurally inappropriate, has brought crucial legal authority to this court's attention. She turned to D.A. Williams. Mr. Williams, in light of the Riverside Printing precedent, how does the prosecution wish to proceed? Williams stood reluctantly. Your Honor, given the recent appellate decision and its apparent applicability to this case, the prosecution moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Chen. A wave of excited whispers swept through the courtroom. Mr. Chen's face broke into a smile of relief and gratitude. Marcus felt a mixture of triumph and continued nervousness about his own situation. Motion granted, Judge Harrison announced. Mr. Chen, the charges against you are dismissed. You're free to go. As Mr. Chen gathered his papers with shaking hands, Judge Harrison turned back to Marcus. Mr. Thompson, while I cannot approve of your methods, I must acknowledge that your intervention prevented a potential miscarriage of justice. However, this court cannot function with teenagers interrupting proceedings regardless of their legal knowledge. Marcus nodded solemnly. I understand, Your Honor. Therefore, I am issuing you a formal warning. Any future interruptions of court proceedings will result in contempt charges. However, I am also directing the court clerk to provide you with information about the county's legal intern program. Sarah Martinez smiled from her position at the clerk's desk, already planning to connect Marcus with opportunities for formal legal training. As the court session concluded, Mr. Chen approached Marcus with tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said simply. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to, Marcus replied. Justice doesn't require repayment. But as the courtroom emptied, Marcus realized that his life had just changed dramatically. Word of his intervention would spread throughout the legal community, and there would be consequences he couldn't yet imagine. News of Marcus's courtroom intervention spread through the legal community like wildfire. By the next morning, local attorneys were discussing the teenage legal genius who had embarrassed the district attorney's office. The story had reached the local newspaper, and reporter Lisa Chang was already making calls to arrange an interview. At Roosevelt High School, Marcus's regular teachers were shocked to learn about their quiet students' courthouse activities. Principal Dr. Williams called Marcus to his office first thing Monday morning, unsure whether he should be proud or concerned about his students' extracurricular interests. Marcus, Principal Williams began, I received several phone calls over the weekend about your activities at the courthouse. Can you explain to me what exactly happened? Marcus recounted the events, watching Dr. Williams' expression change from confusion to amazement. The principal had known Marcus as a bright but somewhat disengaged student who struggled with attendance issues, particularly in his civics and history classes. Marcus, why didn't you tell anyone about your interest in law? We have a debate team, a mock trial club, even connections with local attorneys who do career talks. I tried debate team sophomore year, Marcus replied, but they were more interested in winning arguments than understanding legal principles. Mock trial was the same way. Everyone was just playing roles instead of really learning how the law works. Dr. Williams leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Marcus, your civics teacher tells me you rarely attend class, and when you do, you seem bored. Because we spend weeks learning basic concepts I figured out in my first day at the courthouse, Marcus said honestly. Mrs. Peterson is still explaining the difference between civil and criminal law while I'm reading appellate court decisions about complex constitutional questions. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Mrs. Patterson entered, carrying a folder thick with documents and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Principal Williams, Marcus, she greeted them. I hope you don't mind my stopping by, but there have been some interesting developments since Friday. She opened her folder and pulled out several letters and official documents. Marcus, you've received inquiries from 3 law firms, 2 legal aid organizations, and the State Bar Association's Youth Outreach Program. They all want to meet with you. Marcus stared at the papers in disbelief. Why would they want to meet with me? Because word has gotten out about your legal analysis and courtroom intervention. The legal community is very small, Marcus. When a 17-year-old demonstrates sophisticated legal reasoning, people take notice. Dr. Williams examined the letters, recognizing several prominent law firm letterheads. Marcus, these are significant opportunities, but I'm concerned about your education. You can't just abandon high school to pursue legal interests. Actually, Mrs. Patterson interjected, several of these opportunities specifically include educational components. The State Bar Association has a program that allows exceptional students to complete high school while working part-time in legal settings. That afternoon, Marcus met with attorney David Chen, no relation to the defendant from Friday, at the law firm of Chen, Rodriguez and Associates. The firm specialized in appellate law and had been following the Riverside printing case since its decision. Marcus, attorney Chen began, I've reviewed the legal analysis you provided to Judge Harrison. It's impressive work for someone without formal legal training. Thank you, sir, Marcus replied, feeling somewhat intimidated by the elegant law office with its wall-to-wall legal books and framed court certificates. I'm curious about your research process. How did you identify the relevant precedent so quickly? Marcus explained his systematic approach to following legal developments, his cross-referencing of related cases, and his habit of tracking how appellate decisions affected lower court proceedings. Attorney Chen listened with growing amazement. Marcus, most first-year law students couldn't conduct that level of legal research. Many practicing attorneys don't stay as current with recent precedents as you apparently do. I find it interesting, Marcus said simply. Laws are constantly evolving, and you can see the evolution happening in real time if you follow the court decisions. Attorney Chen made some notes and then looked up seriously. Marcus, I have a proposition for you. My firm handles complex appellate cases, which means we do extensive legal research. We're always looking for bright people who can dive deep into case law and precedent analysis. You mean like a job? A paid internship to start, 20 hours a week, which would work around your school schedule. You'd be doing real legal research on actual cases, working alongside our junior attorneys and paralegals. Marcus felt his heart racing. Would I be qualified for something like that? Based on what you accomplished Friday, you're more qualified than most people twice your age, Attorney Chen replied. The question is whether you're interested in serious legal work, not just watching court proceedings. Meanwhile, across town at the district attorney's office, D.A. Williams was dealing with the fallout from Friday's embarrassment. Chief Deputy D.A. Foster had ordered a review of all pending tax cases to identify others that might be affected by the Riverside printing precedent. Bill, Foster said during their Monday morning meeting, we've identified 12 cases that need to be reviewed in light of this precedent. How did we miss this? The decision was only 6 weeks old, Williams protested. It takes time for new precedents to filter through our case preparation process. Apparently not for teenage court watchers, Foster replied dryly. Bill, this is a serious professional embarrassment. The legal community is talking about how a high school student demonstrated better legal research skills than our senior prosecutor. Foster had been getting calls all morning from other attorneys, some offering condolences and others barely concealing their amusement. The story was becoming legal community folklore. I want you to personally review every tax case we're prosecuting, Foster continued, and I want you to establish better procedures for monitoring recent appellate decisions. We cannot be caught unprepared again. Back at the courthouse, Judge Harrison was having her own discussions about Marcus's intervention. She had called Judge Martinez from the appellate court to discuss the precedential implications of the Riverside printing case and found herself describing Marcus's analysis. "Patricia," Judge Martinez said, "it sounds like this young man has a genuine gift for legal reasoning. Have you considered that he might benefit from more formal legal mentorship?" "I've been thinking about that," Judge Harrison replied, "but he's still in high school. How do we nurture his legal interests without disrupting his education? There are programs for exceptional students. The State Bar Association has connections with several law schools that offer early admission tracks for students who demonstrate unusual legal aptitude." That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table. Spread out before him were the various letters and opportunities that had emerged from his courtroom intervention. His mother, Lisa Thompson, arrived home from her evening shift at the diner to find her son surrounded by legal documents. "Marcus, honey, what's all this?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "Mom, remember how I told you I've been spending time at the courthouse? Yes, I thought it was better than hanging around getting into trouble." Marcus explained the events of Friday and the opportunities that had followed. Lisa listened with growing amazement and pride, though also with worry about her son getting involved in situations beyond his age and experience. "Marcus, this is wonderful, but are you sure you want to get this deeply involved with legal work? You're still just a kid." "Mom, I've found something I'm really good at, something that could change our lives." Lisa looked at the law firm letterheads and official documents, realizing that her son's life was about to change in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. "Okay, honey, but promise me you'll be careful. The adult world can be complicated and sometimes not very forgiving." As Marcus went to bed that night, he could hardly believe the transformation that had occurred since Friday. His impulsive decision to speak up in court had opened doors he never could have imagined. But he also sensed that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. 3 weeks after his courtroom intervention, Marcus began his internship at Chen Rodriguez and Associates. His first day was both exhilarating and intimidating, as he walked through the marble lobby of the downtown office building, carrying a new briefcase his mother had surprised him with the night before. Attorney Chen introduced Marcus to the firm's research team, including senior paralegal Maria Santos and junior attorney James Park. Both were initially skeptical about working with a teenager, but Attorney Chen had briefed them on Marcus's capabilities. "Marcus will be working primarily on precedent research and case analysis," Attorney Chen explained to the team. "I want him treated as a professional colleague, not as a high school student doing busy work." Marcus's first assignment involved researching environmental law precedents for a case the firm was handling on behalf of a small town fighting a proposed waste facility. The case had complex federal and state jurisdictional issues, and the junior attorneys had been struggling to find relevant precedents. "This is incredibly complex," James Park warned Marcus as he handed over the case files. "Environmental law intersects with federal Commerce Clause issues, state regulatory authority, and local zoning powers. Most law students would find this overwhelming." Marcus spent his first week immersed in environmental law databases, cross-referencing federal court decisions with state regulatory precedents. He approached the research systematically, creating detailed charts that tracked how different courts had balanced competing interests in similar cases. By the end of the week, Marcus had identified a line of federal appellate decisions that other attorneys had overlooked. These cases established that federal environmental regulations couldn't supersede local community health determinations when certain procedural requirements were met. "Marcus," Maria Santos said, reviewing his research summary, "where did you find these precedents?" "We've been working on this case for 2 months. I started with the obvious environmental law cases," Marcus explained. "But then I realized the real legal issue wasn't environmental law at all. It was about federal preemption of local authority. So I searched federal preemption cases across different areas of law and found these patterns." James Park studied Marcus's analysis with growing amazement. "Marcus, this is brilliant legal reasoning. You've reframed the entire legal question." The research proved crucial to the firm's case strategy. Attorney Chen used Marcus's precedent analysis to file a motion that ultimately resulted in a favorable settlement for their client. Word of Marcus's contribution spread through the firm, and soon other attorneys were requesting his assistance on difficult research projects. At school, Marcus was struggling to balance his new professional responsibilities with his academic requirements. His legal internship had made his regular classes seem even more irrelevant, and his attendance continued to be problematic. His English teacher, Mr. Davidson, called Marcus aside after he missed 3 consecutive classes. "Marcus, I understand you have some kind of legal internship, but you can't just abandon your education." "Mr. Davidson, with respect, I'm getting more real education in 20 hours a week at the law firm than I get in 30 hours a week here," Marcus replied honestly. "Marcus, legal research isn't the same as a complete education. You need literature, science, mathematics, history." "But I'm using all of those skills in my legal work," Marcus protested. "Last week I had to understand complex environmental science to research pollution cases. I'm constantly reading and writing at a college level, and legal precedent is essentially applied history." Mr. Davidson recognized the validity of Marcus's argument, but was concerned about the precedent. "Marcus, what happens to other students who think they can skip school because they've found something more interesting?" The conversation was interrupted when Principal Williams approached, carrying a folder of documents. "Marcus, I need to speak with you. We've received some interesting communications about your situation." In his office, Principal Williams showed Marcus letters from 3 different law schools and the State Bar Association. "Marcus, these organizations have heard about your legal work and want to discuss early admission or accelerated programs." "What kind of programs?" Marcus asked, examining the official letterheads. "Early admission to law school, accelerated undergraduate programs that focus on pre-law studies, and something called a legal scholar track that would allow you to complete high school while taking college-level law courses." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the possibilities. "Principal Williams, I'm only 17. Can I really handle college-level work? Based on what you've accomplished at the law firm, I think the question isn't whether you can handle it, but whether traditional high school is the right fit for your abilities and interests." That afternoon, Marcus discussed the opportunities with Mrs. Patterson during his regular library visit. She had been following his progress at the law firm and wasn't surprised by the academic interest in his case. "Marcus, you've reached a crossroads," she said, settling into her familiar chair in the law section. "You can continue the traditional educational path and potentially waste years on material you've already mastered, or you can pursue accelerated programs that match your abilities. But what if I'm not really as smart as everyone thinks? What if I just got lucky with that one court case?" Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Marcus, luck doesn't produce the kind of sophisticated legal analysis you've been doing at the law firm. Attorney Chen called me yesterday to discuss your work. He says you're outperforming some of their law school graduates." Meanwhile, the story of Marcus's legal abilities had reached the attention of Professor Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, but a law professor at the state university. She had heard about the teenager through legal community networks and was intrigued by reports of his analytical abilities. Professor Warren arranged to meet Marcus at the law firm, where she reviewed several of his research projects. What she found impressed her beyond her expectations. "Marcus," she said after spending an hour examining his work, "I've been teaching law for 15 years, and I rarely see this level of legal reasoning from graduate students." "Thank you, Professor Warren, but I'm still learning so much every day." "That's exactly what makes you exceptional," she replied. "Most students at your level think they know everything. You understand that legal learning is a lifelong process." Professor Warren explained the university's accelerated law program, which allowed exceptional students to complete undergraduate requirements while beginning law school coursework. The program was highly selective, typically admitting only 2 or 3 students per year. "Marcus, I'd like to recommend you for our program. You would start with a mixed schedule of advanced undergraduate courses and first-year law school classes. If you perform well, you could complete both degrees in 5 years instead of the typical 7. The opportunity was staggering, but Marcus felt torn about leaving high school early. Despite his academic frustrations, he worried about missing important social and developmental experiences. That evening, Marcus sat with his mother at their small kitchen table, discussing the various opportunities and their implications. Lisa Thompson had been working extra shifts to help with Marcus's transportation costs to the law firm, and she was proud of her son's achievements but worried about the pace of change. "Marcus, honey, I want what's best for you," she said carefully. "But I also don't want you to grow up too fast. You're still 17 years old. Mom, I feel like I've already grown up. When I'm working on legal cases, I'm not thinking like a teenager anymore. I'm thinking about complex legal principles and real people's problems. Lisa studied her son's face, seeing the maturity that had developed over the past months. What does your heart tell you to do? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think I want to try the accelerated program, but I'm scared of failing. Honey, you've already succeeded beyond what anyone thought possible. Even if you struggle with some things, you've proven you can handle challenges. The next morning, Marcus made appointments to visit the university and meet with the accelerated program administrators. He also scheduled meetings with representatives from 2 other law schools that had expressed interest in his case. At the law firm, Attorney Chen was supportive of Marcus's educational opportunities but concerned about losing such a talented researcher. Marcus, I understand you need to pursue your education, Attorney Chen said during their meeting, but I hope you'll consider continuing to work with us part-time, even during your college years. Would that be possible with such an intense academic program? We're willing to be flexible. Your research abilities are too valuable to lose entirely, perhaps summer internships or project-based work during school breaks. As Marcus prepared for his university meetings, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that Friday afternoon when he couldn't resist speaking up in Judge Harrison's courtroom. His impulsive decision to cite legal precedent had opened doors he never could have imagined, but he also realized that the real change hadn't happened that day in court. The real change had been developing over months as he systematically educated himself about the law, driven by genuine curiosity and a desire to understand how justice actually worked. James Park, the junior attorney. 6 months after his courtroom intervention, Marcus found himself sitting in Professor Warren's constitutional law classroom, alongside first-year law students, most of whom were 7 to 10 years older than him. The accelerated program had accepted him conditionally, requiring him to prove himself during a trial semester before gaining full admission. The transition had been more challenging than Marcus anticipated. While his legal research skills were exceptional, he struggled with some of the theoretical and philosophical aspects of legal education that he had never encountered in his practical courthouse observations. Mr. Thompson, Professor Warren called during a discussion of Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. How do you reconcile the competing interests in privacy versus security in digital surveillance cases? Marcus had prepared extensively for class, but this question required him to synthesize complex constitutional theory with practical policy considerations. Professor Warren, I think the challenge is that our constitutional framework was created before digital technology existed, so we're trying to apply 18th century principles to 21st century problems. Interesting perspective. How would you approach that challenge? I think we need to focus on the underlying principles rather than the specific technologies. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches, but what's considered reasonable has evolved as society and technology have changed. His classmate Jennifer Martinez, a 24-year-old former paralegal, raised her hand. But Marcus, aren't you oversimplifying the constitutional interpretation process? The Supreme Court has established specific frameworks for analyzing these issues. Marcus felt defensive but tried to respond thoughtfully. You're right that there are established frameworks, but I think sometimes we get so focused on following precedental formulas that we lose sight of the constitutional principles those formulas are supposed to protect. After class, several students approached Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. His youth and unconventional background made him an object of fascination, but some questioned whether he truly belonged in their rigorous academic environment. Marcus, said David Kim, a former business consultant, your practical experience is impressive, but law school is about more than just research skills. Do you think you're prepared for the theoretical rigor? I'm learning, Marcus replied honestly. Some aspects of legal theory are new to me, but I think my practical experience gives me a different perspective that might be valuable. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his part-time work at Chan Rodriguez and Associates, where his contributions remained highly valued. The firm had assigned him to work on an appeals case involving educational funding that had complex constitutional and statutory issues. Marcus, Attorney Chen said during their weekly meeting, I want you to research whether there's precedent for treating educational funding as a fundamental right under state constitutional provisions. The research project required Marcus to examine state constitutional law across multiple jurisdictions, a task that combined his research strengths with the constitutional theory he was studying in Professor Warren's class. He spent weeks analyzing state Supreme Court decisions, identifying patterns in how different courts approached educational rights. His analysis revealed that several state courts had recognized education as a fundamental right, but they had used different constitutional theories to reach that conclusion. Some relied on equal protection principles, others on due process rights, and a few on specific educational clauses in state constitutions. This is sophisticated comparative constitutional analysis, Maria Santos observed as she reviewed Marcus's work. You're identifying legal trends that could influence how courts approach educational funding questions. The research proved crucial when Attorney Chen argued the case before the state appellate court. The brief Marcus had helped prepare cited precedents from 12 states and presented a novel argument about the evolution of educational rights in state constitutional law. 3 weeks later, the court issued a decision that cited several of the precedents Marcus had identified. The victory was significant not only for their client, but also for establishing new legal precedent about educational funding rights. Marcus, Attorney Chen said when the decision came down, your research was instrumental in this victory. The court specifically relied on the comparative analysis you developed. At school, Marcus was struggling to maintain connections with his traditional high school friends. His schedule was now split between university classes, law firm work, and the remaining high school requirements he needed to complete. His social life had become virtually non-existent. His friend Jake Miller, whom he had known since middle school, confronted him during one of his rare appearances at Roosevelt High School. "Marcus, you've become like a ghost," Jake said. "We never see you anymore. Are you too good for your old friends now?" "It's not that, Jake. I'm just really busy with school and work." "School and work? Dude, you're 17 years old. You're supposed to be worried about prom dates and college applications, not whatever lawyer stuff you're doing." Marcus felt the weight of Jake's criticism. He had missed most of the traditional senior year experiences, and sometimes he wondered if he was sacrificing too much for his legal career ambitions. "Jake, I found something I'm really good at, something that could change my entire future. But what kind of future are you building if you don't have any friends or normal experiences?" The conversation haunted Marcus for days. He was excelling academically and professionally, but he was also increasingly isolated from people his own age. His law school classmates treated him as a curiosity, and his high school friends felt abandoned. Professor Warren noticed Marcus's struggles during office hours one afternoon. "Marcus, you seem distracted lately. Are you having difficulty with the coursework?" "The academics are fine, Professor Warren, but I'm starting to wonder if I'm missing out on important parts of being a teenager." Professor Warren leaned back in her chair, considering her response carefully. "Marcus, exceptional talent often requires exceptional sacrifices, but it's important to find balance. How do you find balance when your peers are years older or years younger, and nobody really understands what you're going through?" "That's a challenge that many gifted students face," she acknowledged. "Have you considered connecting with other students in accelerated programs? There are support networks for people in your situation." That weekend, Marcus attended a gathering of students in various accelerated academic programs at the university. He met Sarah Chen, a 16-year-old mathematics prodigy, and Michael Rodriguez, an 18-year-old who had started medical school a year early. "The social isolation is the hardest part," Sarah admitted during their conversation. "People either treat you like a freak or they expect you to be some kind of superhuman." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "And you can't really complain about it because everyone thinks you're so lucky to have these opportunities." Michael nodded. "I've learned that you have to create your own community. Traditional social structures don't work for people like us." The conversation was enlightening for Marcus, who realized that his struggles were shared by other young people pursuing exceptional academic paths. He wasn't alone in feeling caught between different worlds. Back at the courthouse, Judge Harrison had been following Marcus's progress with interest. She had heard about his success in law school and at the law firm, but she was also concerned about the pressures facing someone so young. During a chance encounter at the courthouse coffee shop, she approached Marcus during one of his brief visits to observe proceedings. "Mr. Thompson, How are you adjusting to your new academic and professional responsibilities? It's challenging, Your Honor, but I'm learning a tremendous amount. I'm sure you are. But Marcus, remember that wisdom isn't just about accumulating knowledge. It's also about understanding people and life experiences. What do you mean, Your Honor? Your legal skills are exceptional, but the best attorneys are those who understand human nature and can connect with people from all walks of life. Don't let your academic pursuits isolate you from the broader human experience. Judge Harrison's words stayed with Marcus as he considered his path forward. He was succeeding academically and professionally, but he was also aware that his rapid advancement was creating gaps in his personal development. That evening, Marcus called his old friend Jake and suggested they meet for dinner. He realized that maintaining connections to his past wasn't a sign of weakness or regression. It was an essential part of becoming a complete person and, ultimately, a better attorney. As he prepared for his next semester of law school, Marcus understood that his journey wasn't just about mastering legal principles and procedures. It was also about learning to navigate the complex balance between exceptional ability and normal human experience. 2 years after his dramatic courtroom intervention, Marcus Thompson stood at the podium of the State Bar Association's annual conference, delivering a presentation on legal research in the digital age to an audience of seasoned attorneys. At 19, he had completed his undergraduate degree while simultaneously finishing his second year of law school, maintaining a perfect academic record while continuing his work at Chen, Rodriguez and Associates. The transformation was remarkable, but the journey had taught Marcus lessons that went far beyond legal knowledge. Legal research isn't just about finding relevant precedents, Marcus told the assembled attorneys. It's about understanding how legal principles evolve and intersect across different areas of law. Technology has given us unprecedented access to information, but human judgment remains essential in synthesizing that information meaningfully. In the audience, Judge Harrison watched with pride as the teenager who had once interrupted her courtroom now commanded the attention of legal professionals twice his age. Beside her sat D.A. Williams, who had become an unexpected ally and mentor to Marcus after their initial courtroom confrontation. Following his presentation, Marcus was approached by attorneys from across the state, many offering positions at prestigious firms. But Marcus had already made decisions about his future that surprised many who had followed his rapid rise in the legal community. "Mr. Thompson," said attorney Rebecca Foster from a major corporate firm in the state capital, "we'd love to discuss opportunities for you after you complete law school. Your reputation for legal research is already legendary." "Thank you for your interest," Marcus replied politely. "But I've already committed to returning to Chen, Rodriguez and Associates, and I plan to focus on legal aid and pro bono work." Attorney Foster looked puzzled. "Marcus, you could command a substantial salary at any major firm. Why limit yourself to smaller practices and public interest work?" Marcus thought about his response carefully. "Because I learned something important that Friday afternoon when I watched Mr. Chen struggle with a legal system that seemed designed to overwhelm him. Legal knowledge should serve justice, not just profits." After the conference, Marcus drove back to his hometown, where he had maintained his apartment near the university. Despite opportunities to relocate to larger cities, he had learned that staying connected to his community was essential to understanding the real-world impact of legal work. At the courthouse, he stopped by to visit Sarah Martinez, the court clerk who had watched his journey from the beginning. She was now preparing to retire after 35 years of service. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you for believing in me when I was just a curious teenager taking notes in the gallery," Marcus said. "Marcus, I never doubted you had something special, but I'm prouder of the man you've become than the legal scholar you've developed into." "What do you mean?" "You could have let success go to your head. You could have forgotten where you came from or why you started studying law. Instead, you've stayed grounded and focused on using your abilities to help people." That evening, Marcus met with his mother at their favorite diner, where she still worked part-time despite his offers to support her completely. Lisa Thompson had watched her son navigate extraordinary opportunities while remaining the caring, principled young man she had raised. "Mom, I've been thinking about my future after law school," Marcus began over coffee and pie. "What are your thoughts?" "I want to start a legal clinic that focuses on helping people who can't afford attorneys. People like Mr. Chen who get lost in the complexity of the legal system." Lisa smiled. That sounds like the Marcus I raised. But honey, can you make a living doing that kind of work? Attorney Chen has offered to help me establish the clinic as part of his firm's pro bono program, and I've received grants from several legal foundations who are interested in supporting innovative approaches to legal aid. The next morning, Marcus visited Mrs. Patterson at the library, where she was helping a new generation of curious students discover legal resources. At 72, she remained sharp and engaged, still passionate about connecting people with knowledge. Mrs. Patterson, I wanted to tell you about my plans for a legal aid clinic, Marcus said, settling into his familiar chair in the law section. Tell me everything, she said, her eyes bright with interest. Marcus outlined his vision for a clinic that would provide legal services to underserved communities, while also training law students in practical legal work. The clinic would focus on areas like housing law, family law, and small business legal issues, the kinds of problems that affected ordinary people but were often too expensive to address through traditional legal channels. Marcus, this sounds like a wonderful way to use your talents, Mrs. Patterson said, but I'm curious. What changed your thinking from when you first started coming here as a 17-year-old? Marcus considered the question. I think watching that first case with Mr. Chen taught me that legal knowledge is only valuable if it serves justice. All the research skills and academic achievements in the world don't matter if they don't help real people solve real problems. 6 months later, Marcus graduated summa cum laude from law school at age 21, the youngest graduate in the university's history. But the achievement that meant the most to him was the successful establishment of the Thompson Legal Aid Clinic, named in honor of his mother's sacrifices and support. The clinic's first case involved helping a family fight an unfair eviction, ironically similar to the housing issues Marcus had observed years earlier in Judge Harrison's courtroom. Working alongside 2 other young attorneys and several law students, Marcus successfully negotiated a settlement that allowed the family to remain in their home. Judge Harrison attended the clinic's opening ceremony, where she delivered remarks about the importance of accessible legal services. During her speech, she reflected on the afternoon 2 years earlier when a teenager had interrupted her courtroom. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places, she told the assembled crowd. Marcus Thompson reminded us that legal knowledge belongs to the community, not just to those with formal legal training. His clinic embodies that principle. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself alone with Judge Harrison, reflecting on how much had changed since their first encounter. Your Honor, I want to apologize again for disrupting your courtroom that day. Judge Harrison smiled. Marcus, that disruption was one of the most valuable things that ever happened in my courtroom. You reminded everyone present that the law serves people, not the other way around. I was terrified that day, Marcus admitted, as you should have been. But you spoke up anyway because you saw an injustice that needed to be addressed. That takes real courage. As Marcus prepared to begin his career as a practicing attorney, he understood that his journey from curious teenager to legal advocate had taught him lessons that would shape his entire professional life. He had learned that exceptional ability comes with exceptional responsibility, that knowledge without compassion is meaningless, and that true success is measured by the positive impact you have on others' lives. The clinic's waiting room filled quickly with clients seeking help with legal problems they couldn't afford to address elsewhere. Marcus looked at the faces of people who reminded him of Mr. Chen, ordinary individuals overwhelmed by legal complexity, but deserving of justice and representation. He opened his first client file, picked up his pen, and began the work he had been preparing for since that Friday afternoon, when he couldn't resist speaking up in a courtroom. The scared 17-year-old who had interrupted Judge Harrison had become a confident young attorney, but his core motivation remained unchanged, the belief that everyone deserves access to justice, regardless of their ability to pay for it. As he prepared for his first case as a licensed attorney, Marcus realized that his story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. The legal genius who had embarrassed a prosecutor and impressed a judge was now ready to use his abilities in service of the community that had shaped him and the principles that had guided him from the very start.